But absolutely, I think if you're really getting serious about chironomids, you got to have some bright green in the mix. So I messed around with some different colors, again compared to stuff that I had, you know, in my tying supplies.
So would you tie this in chartreuse? Fluorescent chartreuse?
Yeah. So this color here, the thread is fluorescent chartreuse.
Oh.
Yeah. The Uniflex that I'm going to use is chartreuse. But you could use anything that's bright green. I think it needs to have a little bit of the brightness. They're not just a plain green. They're definitely a chartreuse fluorescent kind of hue. So, well, the other thing too with chironomids, one thing, and I didn't bring my other box, but here's a good example. If you can kind of see. So you see in my box, I'm just starting this box right here. I've got the top row weighted, second row weighted, third row not weighted. So for the most part, I will vary the weights of my chironomids, both by color and style. So this one I'm going to tie here is a little bit heavier version of, sure, hook there. A little bit heavier version of the same one that I may tie with a smaller bead. So this is going to be one that if I'm finding the fish are closer to the bottom and I need to get it down quicker, that's what I'll do. Which also goes to the idea of why I use probably more of a midge tip or hover line as opposed to a sinking line. Midge tip line is a floating line with a 6 or 12 foot, it's an intermediate kind of slow sinking section. So it's that tip section, it will sink at like an inch a second or less. I can't remember the rate. But the nice thing is that you can cast it out, and I'll use a long leader, like a 15 to 20 foot leader with 3 flies. And the flies will be spaced 4 to 6 feet apart. So I've got a heavier one on the point. The 2 droppers, the first dropper may be a bead. The top dropper will be unweighted. That way I can fish the water column. You know, if I'm fishing even 20 feet of water, this happened at Strawberry in the fall, we were marking fish at 20 feet, and our midge tip wasn't going to get down 20 feet. But what we found was we would let it get down, and we were picking off the fish that were in 10 feet of water, even though the majority of the fish we were marked were at 20. So, but I wouldn't have gotten that if I'd had like an indicator, because an indicator gets me a set depth of maybe 2 or 3 feet apart. But this one, the midge tip will separate your flies out, and you can control the depth based on the fly. So I'll have like some of the next one I'm going to tie after this one is it's my deep pattern, and it's this dark red black one. So this is kind of the phase right after they're starting to pupate from their blood worm phase, and I'll get that heavy. So if I need on that midge tip line, that'll be on the point. That'll get everything down to the bottom, and I can be, you know, again, depending on the length of the leader and the setup of the flies, I can kind of gauge where I'm fishing. So if the fish are in the top 2 feet of the water column, then what I'll do is I'll trim off any weighted flies and fish 2 unweighted flies. And that way I'm fishing in this water column. And literally with 1 fly change, I can be back down to 10 feet. And that way I don't have to switch lines. For chironomids, I probably fish 80% of the time with a midge tip. Used to use indicators a lot more. I found that indicators, I'm missing so many fish. So, not saying that they're not good, I'm just saying that I prefer this method. But anyway, enough blather. If I really wanted to weight this, I could add some lead or lead-free wire. So, this one, and this is a style, and the next one I tie will be a similar kind of style. But probably my favorite style is sometimes called a span flex buzzer, a flex buzzer, a gray boy is another name they use in the UK. And it really just consists of thread, or in this case some hollow tinsel, and Uniflex. Believe me, I go through this almost every year, but I try all the different body materials and I do experiments on what looks the best. In my opinion, Uniflex is the most versatile. It looks the best when you're done. It looks like the most realistic segmentation. It's also super cheap for 15 yards. This stuff will last quite a while. And again, you could use Spanflex, you could use Legs Alive from Lietire's Dungeon. What other names? Sexy Floss. Brian Chan and Phil Rowley have another one they used to sell. Something, Chironomid something, I don't know. Anyway, it's the same. It's a spandex material, really stretchy. So this is a style I use, probably my favorite style for tying Chironomid patterns, because you can mix it up. Here's the thing, the other, let's call it a secret to Chironomids, is Chironomids come in a lot of different colors. If you look at the naturals, the colors are, there's a large segment and then the small segments. So if you've seen something like a chromie or a zebra midge, the large segment would be what the thread is showing, and then the small segment would be the wire. So if you look at the naturals around, you're going to see the large segment, so the combinations would be, you may see black large segment, red small segment. Silver large segment, red small segment. Olive or green large segment, silver small segment. Olive or green large and small. Red large and small. Olive, brown. So I try to keep actually have a list in my notes that I keep track of so I don't forget which the color combinations there. So in other words, you're not going to find a Chironomid that I've seen that has red large segment, black small segment so much. It may look that way. Or you may, it just depends on the phase of the bug. And I've found that makes a difference. If you're fishing higher in the water column and they're pupating close to the surface, they're going to be really silver. They may have some red, but they may also have some black in there, so that'll be the small segment. Anyway, enough nerding out on Chironomid colors. So what I do to tie this in, and that kind of the thing with Chironomids is they are fairly skinny along the main part of the body. So I don't like to tie in, like you see, a lot of times you'll tie in a material and then have it go the length of the body. I don't like to do that just because this adds bulk that I don't need. So here's a trick that I use. I'll rein my thread in a little, and I'll take a wrap and then position my material right on the top. So it's right on the top. I've done 2 wraps, holding it tight. I'm going to come in here and do 2 locking wraps. So that's locked in there. Now I'm going to come in here, and you can use your fingers if you want. Pull that up. Using sharp scissors, trim it. So now you can see I can start wrapping that with very minimal bulk on that end. Chironomids are tapered.
Could you use chartreuse mid tubing instead of the uniform?
Yeah, you could use that. Chartreuse mid tubing would work well. I have messed around with the midge tubing. I've messed around with D-rib. D-rib also works well. I like D-rib more for the consistent uniform colors, but it'll work just as well. There's a lot of things you can use for bodies. It's not a magic material, but I do like the way this looks. So now I'm going to grab some holographic tinsel in small. You could use sulky. You could also use Flashaboo. Flashaboo is the same mylar material. And I think it's, with a lot of my Chironomids, I like to have red because there's a lot of hemoglobin going on there. So I'll just use my touching turns on up to about the hook point. Now I'm going to grab my hollow tinsel and just wrap. You can wrap solid or you can segment it however you want to do. But again, if you're looking at the naturals, you will notice some red segments in almost any color Chironomid. There's going to be pupas, at least. Going to be some vestiges of red. Obviously bloodworms, kind of where all that begins, but they will have these leftover colors in them. And then, and it's important, I like to cover the hook as well as I can. I'm going to go on up. And on any chironomid that I tie, I'll use kind of the same thing where I build up a taper. Usually up and back a couple times, and that will create the taper for me. And we can just trim off our excess here. Okay, so that's the body. And with my Uniflex, the first couple wraps I'm going to do fairly tightly because I want that to be thin, but I need to leave a little bit of room for that segment to show through. And then after the third or fourth wrap, I'm going to go ahead and release the tension and let it just wrap. Again, they're almost touching, but you need to leave a little bit of space so that the underbody can show through. All the way on up to my thorax. We'll just trap that. Throw a couple locks in front. And then pull. Got it. Okay. So now I've got my body tied up. We can see some of the hemoglobin shining through there. And now we're going to coat it. So what I've got here is some Loon UV clear fly finish. Just a note on UV products, if you've messed around with different ones, you know, there's Clear Cure Goo that was around for a while, now they went out of business. Loon and Solarez and Deer Creek, probably the top three out there that you'll find. Loon, we work with Loon quite a bit across testing materials, or not materials, but products and tools. They're the only one that's actually tested for toxicity and other nasties that you could get by touching this. So I use that quite a bit. I do like Solarez a lot. They've actually been around longer than anybody. And their stuff is really, really good. I can't stand Deer Creek because it smells horrible. But anyway, and it comes in different viscosities. This is the fluorescing stuff, and I'll show you what that means in a second when I shine my light on it. But just a little, this is the thinnest that you can get. It's tack-free once it cures. And this is by no means any scientific claim. But I've had, in the last 2 years since this has been out, I've had probably 3 times where I've been fishing right next to Cheech usually, and I'm roping fish, and he's not catching anything. Now that's not new, but in a couple cases, I mean, we're literally within casting distance of each other, using the same kind of chironomids, and the only difference in the couple cases that we had was I had used this, and he had used no UV finish or maybe a different kind. I was talking to the Loon guys about this. They did some field testing with some saltwater guys who'd use these on deceivers or clousers, I can't remember which. And they'd given some out to guys that didn't know what they were tied with. Some were finished with this and some not. And the guys that came back that had these, again, they didn't know, they caught a lot more. It was a marked difference. So the theory is that it has some UV reflectance properties, and there's a mixed agreement on whether or not fish can see reflected UV wavelengths of light. I don't know, I'm not a scientist. I do know that I use this on a lot of my patterns. I like it a lot, and I think it has made a difference. So this is the one I use when I'm going to use UV that's thin like this. So what I'll normally do is apply a small thin coat. I'm not trying to coat the entire pattern with a big clump, although I would like it to come out of the bottle. Last night I was getting a little chummy with the light.
Are you using float or thin?
So this is the equivalent of flow.
Okay.
It's the the fluorescing UV clear. So it's the viscosity of flow. It just has the UV stuff to it.
I had issues with the tips clogging up like that until I just started storing it upside down. And then it's always wet and never clogs.
Yeah, and the funny thing is on the way over, it actually tipped over and had a little leakage in the thing, but we'll get it to come out eventually.
Don't tie with it outside.
Yeah, you don't want to tie with it outside.
But once.
Yeah, you're not going to do too many. I'm going to live on the edge here. Okay.
So my Beavis tensile shows right through this green chartreuse, almost no matter how loose I wrap it.
And that's fine. You using tinsel underbody?
Tensile underbody, but I tried to wrap it without any tension, and it's darker, but it's still not.
Yeah, and it will. This specific combination is a little different in that respect, so I wouldn't worry about it. So as I fear I got a little too much, so we're going to do it.
I'm using chartreuse tubing and it's a bit too transparent.
Yeah, that's what my problem is.
If I had to say what the importance factor is, wouldn't worry about the translucence or the overall color. If you got the segmentation and it's a brighter green like this, I think you're golden. I'm going to stick this over here. And now see how that just pops? That basically is irresistible to fish. They can't resist it, literally. Anyway, it's a giver. It's a fish giver. And the final thing I'm going to add here, believe it or not, is some UV shrimp pink eye stuff. Too much on there. Oh, and I forgot an important aspect. Forgot the breathers. So one little note, I forgot to put the breathers on, but actually, let's see here. Nope, we're stuck. So normally what I'll do is I'll take parapost wing material, and I've used a lot of different options for breathers. My theory on breathers with Chironomids says, like I explained on the last fly, it needs to be very visible. So if you use something like CDC or maybe even a non-treated Antron or something, I don't think they show up as well as this parapost. So I use parapost in white, and usually before I tie anything on the fly, I'll tie the breathers in, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So here's a smaller fly, but so I'll tie those breathers in first.
In front of the bead?
In front of the bead, yeah. So I'll tie the breathers in. You got to minimize your wraps, especially on the smaller sizes, so that the bead doesn't, or the bead's able to sit or be seated on the top, on the front there. But I think, you know, if you've probably heard of the ice cream cone pattern. I just think breathers are a really key component. So I'll use them quite a bit, not in every pattern. Okay, so there is the finished fly. So now if you've seen some of my Instagram or Facebook photos on Chironomids, a lot of times I'll tie in the wing pads. Honestly, sometimes I don't think it really matters because not all of them have visible wing pads. But in the case of the shrimp pink, like I said, I think it is a good representation, and I tie it in the round, meaning the trout looks at it, it's going to say, well, it's a wing pad, doesn't know that there's not one on the other side, or doesn't know that it goes all the way around. So, you know, again, if I'm tying flies for, well, here's a good example. You know, if I'm thinking the fish are going to be a little pickier, I'll tie in something like this that's going to have that wing pad in there, really slim down. This is for a fish that's just being super techie picky. And so this is more kind of the absolute match the hatch. This guy is more of an imitative attractor. It's still going to catch a lot of fish. And that's another reason why I'll fish a team of 2 to 3 flies when I'm doing chironomids. Because usually you got to dial in the depth and you got to dial in the color, well, and the size. But if you're fishing a good average size, I don't think that's as big a deal. If you can dial in where they're feeding and the color they're feeding on the majority, you're golden. And if you've ever fished with Lance Egan, I mean, that guy, number one, he's world famous for his Euro nymphing, but the dude can catch fish on still water like that nobody I've ever seen. So a lot of my approach has kind of been honed by being outfished by him whenever we go. So and he's kind of the same approach where he'll have some that are super weighted, some that are not so much. But it's really just about getting it down to where the fish are and then making sure you've got a color that they'll eat. And so that's kind of what that is. Yeah, so your strawberry early season, this would be killer. Places where you're fishing in maybe less than 15 feet, 10, 15 feet. You start on the bottom and kind of work your way up. Okay.